A massive fire suddenly breaks out at the school. Instead of escaping, our MC returns to the place he loves most, the school's art room. There, he mysteriously enters one of his own paintings. 1 week passes after the incident. Gio is still trapped inside the painting. Time flows differently there, so he has no idea how long he has actually been inside. However, he has managed to discover a few simple rules about this strange world. The first rule is that anything he draws becomes real. A bag of salt, cooking pots, spatulas, flowers, and even trees instantly come to life. Thanks to this ability, he never has to worry about groceries again. However, this power has one major limitation. It does not work on humans. Any person he draws becomes nothing more than a warm corpse and can never become a living human. After understanding that ability, Gio uncovers the second rule. A mysterious frame hanging on a tree allows him to interact with the outside world. He can even step outside the painting through it. During one of those visits, he discovers that more than 30 years have passed since the school fire. The world has completely changed and is now filled with monsters. Unable to adapt to this new era, he chooses to remain inside the painting, believing that a portrait belongs inside its frame. As time passes, Gio notices the third rule. The forest inside the painting has evolved into a complete ecosystem of its own. He only painted a 2-story cottage and a forest, yet countless plants and landmarks that he never created now exist throughout the landscape. Every creature living there is also friendly toward him. Since they were born inside his artwork, they naturally see him as their creator. While exploring further, Gio discovers the fourth rule. It is not a rule of the forest itself, but a phenomenon connected to those who awakened after the great catastrophe. The people of Earth now call them hunters, and Gio realizes that he has become one as well. Inside the painting, his life feels like a relaxing simulation game, where he gathers ingredients, cooks meals, eats well, sleeps peacefully, and never has to work. It becomes the happiest life he could have imagined. Back when Gio worked as a teacher, he never had time to enjoy cooking. Now he happily spends hours preparing and enjoying his meals, embracing what he calls a peaceful 3-hour dining life. Finally, Gio discovers the last rule. He has become one with the painting itself. At that moment, his identity is fully revealed, and the main character is introduced as Gio. Gio had grown to love the peaceful world inside the painting. The place was so tranquil that he would not have minded spending the rest of his life there. Meanwhile, in the outside world, 2 people noticed the painting. They were shocked that it had survived the massive school fire without a single mark. They also spotted the title written on it, Gio's Portrait. After examining it, they concluded that the title confirmed it was an item. Considering they had found it inside an abandoned school deep in the mountains of Gangwon province, and it was the only object that remained completely spotless, they became convinced that it had originated from a dungeon. Believing it to be a valuable discovery, they quickly packed up the painting. They wondered whether it would count as worthwhile loot, but they were certain that the Collector Guild would pay an enormous price for it. Excited by the thought of becoming rich, they carried the painting away, while Gio continued enjoying his peaceful life. The entrance to the painting suddenly shifted on its own. Before he realized what had happened, the painting had already been transported to a collector's gallery. Sometime later, a man purchased the painting and hung it on the wall of his home. His identity was then revealed. His name was Sabiol, an S-class hunter and the leader of the Collector Guild. The story then shifts to a moment from earlier. Sabiol's assistant questions why he spent such an enormous amount of money to purchase a single portrait. Sabiol explains that the portrait is the very one the Hunter Association president has been desperately trying to obtain. He recalls the events from 31 years ago, when the great catastrophe struck. Countless dimensions collided with Earth, creating dungeons that endlessly released monsters. As humanity faced destruction because of the interference of the divinities, the system was created and saved mankind from extinction. He then mentions one of humanity's greatest symbols. The Hunter Association president, Dan Hera, despite having no interest in collecting items and only enjoying raising monsters, she still pushed the bidding price all the way to 2,000 for this portrait. Hearing that, the assistant is left completely shocked. Sabiol begins wondering what makes this artwork so special. Even with his appraisal skill, he could not obtain any information about it, making it difficult to believe such an item could exist. Realizing his mistake, the assistant admits that his own skills were insufficient to recognize the portrait's true value. He apologizes for judging it too quickly. Sabiol tells him there is no need to apologize, because he understands. After all, even he has no idea what the portrait truly is. The story then returns to the present. While quietly observing the painting, Sabiol admires the incredible craftsmanship behind it. He believes that if a human created it, the artist's talent is beyond imagination. Even if it was not painted by a human, he would still reach the same conclusion. The portrait feels as though a living person has been sealed inside it, overflowing with an unbelievable sense of vitality. At that very moment, Gio suddenly opens his eyes from inside the painting. The unexpected sight completely shocks Sabiol. For an instant, Sabiol feels as though he is staring into endless darkness, filled with countless colors, resembling the universe itself. A moment later, Gio quietly closes his eyes again. Seeing this, Sabiol becomes even more convinced that the painting is extraordinary. The fact that even his appraisal skill could not identify it only strengthens his belief. Meanwhile, Gio, the man trapped inside the painting, is absolutely terrified. Gio quietly reflects on his situation. Even in this peaceful cabin, he has started feeling that his life is under threat. He had already noticed that the scenery beyond the entrance had been changing recently, but he never expected someone to begin talking to him. Outside the painting, Sabiol politely addresses the portrait and asks for a conversation. The unexpected request makes Gio feel extremely awkward. As Gio observes the outside world through the entrance, he realizes that the painting has been placed inside an incredibly luxurious building. The carefully crafted interior makes it obvious that the gallery is deeply cherished by its owner. That realization leaves Gio troubled. The frame is his only entrance to the outside world. If he steps outside now, it could easily be considered trespassing. He even worries that someone might mistake the portrait for a haunted painting and burn it. To him, the outside world feels far harsher than before. Seeing no response, Sabiol assumes he approached too suddenly. He decides to leave for the day and promises to return tomorrow. Hearing that only makes Gio even more nervous. As the days pass, Gio's peaceful routine inside the painting begins with another delicious meal. Today, he decides to make tea using the flowers and fruits he had previously gathered and dried. However, he realizes he does not have a tea set. He simply draws one, and the tea set immediately becomes real. He then calmly sits down and enjoys a cup of tea. This becomes one of the newest hobbies discovered by the unemployed slacker living inside the painting. Using the system's elixir refining method, he begins brewing medicinal tea. According to the system, the tea can stop bleeding and strengthen immunity. Unfortunately, Gio cannot verify those effects on himself. Ever since he fell into the painting, his body has completely lost its normal physiological needs. He can still move, eat, and sleep, but he never feels hot or cold, never sweats, and no longer needs to use the bathroom. Simply falling into a painting has transformed him into something far beyond an ordinary human. On the bright side, it also means he never has to clean a bathroom again. However, that is not the biggest problem on his mind. At that moment, Sabiol's voice reaches him through the painting once again. Gio realizes that 11 days have already passed since Sabiol first tried to communicate with him. The entrance itself indicates that Sabiol is a relatively safe person, and Gio appreciates his friendly attitude. Even so, responding still feels overwhelming. Outside the painting, Sabiol admits that watching someone only open and close their eyes inside the frame has been driving him crazy because he desperately wants a conversation. He even wonders whether his offerings are unsuitable. He considers that the most common sacrifice might be a sinful human, or perhaps someone completely flawless. Since finding sinful people in modern society is easy, he offers to provide any type of sinner Gio might desire. He also promises to fulfill any request involving objects, contracts, or conditions if only he receives a response. Even after hearing all of that, Gio feels even more pressured. He believes that replying even once would create a future he could never handle. Still refusing to give up, Sabiol wonders whether the language barrier is the problem. He reveals that he has already tried speaking in 27 different languages without receiving any reaction. Gio also learns that, according to the gallery staff, Sabiol is the chairman of one of South Korea's 3 largest conglomerates. Hearing that leaves Gio wondering why someone so important is spending time here instead of working. Sabiol asks one final time whether Gio truly has no intention of speaking with him. Gio remains completely silent. Accepting the silence, Sabiol decides to leave and promises to visit again before walking away. After he leaves, Gio reflects on Sabiol's behavior. He cannot sense any malice from him, and he does not dislike him because he seems like a genuinely decent person. Even so, the constant attention is mentally exhausting. Gio convinces himself that Sabiol cannot continue this forever. Just like he eventually left today, he will probably grow tired of waiting someday. When that happens, Gio plans to interact with him. His biggest concern is the possibility that Sabayol might eventually decide the portrait cannot be reasoned with and burn it. If the painting is destroyed, Gio has no idea what will happen to the world inside it. He has no intention of being burned alive. More than anything, he wants to reclaim ownership of his one and only entrance. The scene then shifts back to the outside world, where a woman is carefully inspecting various items. As soon as she notices the portrait, she suddenly freezes in surprise. At the same moment, she senses someone's presence behind her. She turns around, only to find a man calmly asking for a conversation. One of South Korea's top 3 guild collectors owned a private gallery. The gallery belonged to Bisabiol and was accessible only to around 300 licensed hunter curators and guests purchasing artwork. A mysterious man arrived at the guild and entered the elevator. An employee informed him about rumors of a ghost. The employee explained that the gallery on basement level 5 had received 17 complaints over the past 2 weeks. Guild leader Bisabayol collected anything he considered art, even if the artwork's true nature happened to be a monster. Most of the ghost incidents inside the gallery had been caused by monsters. The mysterious man was Yu Seongun, an A-class hunter known as the gardener of the snowfield, and a collector-curator. Yu Seongun learned that ghost incidents were not uncommon, but this case had resulted in an unusually high number of complaints. The employee explained that the guild had successfully stopped the rumors from spreading outside. Since the incidents had remained small in scale, controlling the flow of information had not been difficult. However, there was no guarantee that the situation could remain contained forever. Hearing this, Yu Seongun immediately realized that an enormous amount of overtime was waiting for him. Even so, he was already used to handling situations like this. He accepted the assignment and asked what needed to be done. The employee praised his reliability and admitted that he truly wished Yu Seongun would become the guild's administrative manager. Yu Seongun expressed his gratitude. The employee recalled that Yu Seongun had once served as a research team leader at the Hunter Association. Yu Seongun confirmed that it was true. The employee remembered how everyone at the association had glared at him after he left. Yu Seongun explained that he simply did not want to stand out. Understanding his decision, the employee decided not to pressure him any further, although he admitted it was a shame. The employee emphasized that allowing rumors about the gallery to spread would damage the guild's reputation. The guild had already reported everything to the guild leader and was preparing countermeasures. Witness statements regarding the ghost incident had also been compiled, and beginning the following week, every staff member would undergo enhanced safety training. Yu Seongun began reading the investigation report. The first sighting had occurred at 4:32 a.m. The first witness was a 24-year-old staff member named Mr. Kim, who had no chronic illnesses and a perfectly normal attendance record. The ghost was consistently described as approximately 188 centimeters tall, with a well-built physique, pale skin, black hair, and a black cape. The report noted that every witness gave the exact same description. Everyone also insisted that the ghost was incredibly handsome. A composite sketch had even been created based on the testimony of staff member Park, who claimed to have exceptionally high standards. The report listed several consistent characteristics. Witnesses found it nearly impossible to make eye contact with the ghost. Although none of them could properly look at its face, every single witness still insisted that it was handsome. The ghost made absolutely no sound while moving. Even during conversations, no footsteps or other noises could be heard. The only audible sound was its voice. Yu Seongun observed that the reports were remarkably consistent. He concluded that the monster had disguised itself as one of the gallery's display pieces, yet showed no interest in hiding its own existence. He found it especially strange that the creature had appeared so many times without causing even a single casualty. Every monster that had emerged from dungeons over the years had always shown hostility toward humans, without exception. Everything that poured out of those other dimensions behaved the same way. If a monster like this truly existed, it would become worldwide front-page news. Before the public could even learn about it, the Hunter Association would most likely capture it and lock it away as a research specimen. Yu Seongun continued reading and discovered another unusual detail. The report stated that the ghost gave people gifts. The employee explained that whenever someone encountered the ghost for the first time, it calmly approached them and attempted to hold an ordinary conversation, behaving as though it were simply another human being. No one truly believed it was human simply because it pretended to be one. However, it genuinely seemed to believe that it was human. After introducing itself, the ghost politely asked to exchange names with the staff member. It introduced itself as Seogio. Yu Seong-un noted that despite the overwhelming pressure preventing witnesses from even meeting its gaze, the ghost calmly continued the conversation. The conversations themselves remained completely ordinary. It never asked deeply personal questions. If someone hesitated to reveal their identity, it never forced the issue. After every successful conversation, the ghost presented the staff member with a gift. The employee showed Yu Seong-un photographs of candies, cakes, cookies, and other sweets. Yu Seong-un was stunned, finding it difficult to believe that a ghost behaved in such a strangely domestic manner. He immediately asked whether the items had been analyzed. The employee explained that guild leader Bisabeol had happened to have several prisoners prepared, allowing the guild to begin testing the gifts immediately. Yu Seong-un casually realized that the guild leader had borrowed prisoners from prison once again. He wondered whether the gifts had been poisoned. Instead, the employee revealed the complete opposite. The gifts functioned as medicine. Some acted as anemia medication. Others served as digestive medicine, painkillers, fever reducers, anti-diarrheal medicine, and many other treatments. Every gift perfectly matched the medical condition of the staff member who had received it. Even the research team still had no explanation for how completely ordinary-looking food possessed such extraordinary medicinal properties. The more Yu Seong-un learned, the more troublesome the monster appeared. It could accurately understand the physical condition of living beings. It could also create objects capable of directly affecting those conditions. On top of that, it had bypassed the guild's security systems and successfully disguised itself as an exhibit inside the gallery. That meant it possessed exceptional concealment abilities as well. Yu Seong-un concluded that the creature was almost certainly a high-ranking monster. The employee agreed but admitted that its goodwill toward humans made the situation extremely complicated. Yu Seong-un remarked that he would almost prefer the monster to go on a rampage. A violent enemy would have been much easier to deal with. Instead, the guild found itself unable to subdue the creature, yet equally unable to win it over. Yu Seong-un reflected on how goodwill shown by dungeon civilizations was often the most terrifying thing imaginable. 11 years earlier, several nations had sent diplomatic delegations to establish peaceful contact with a civilization discovered inside a dungeon. Every single delegate had eventually returned as a healthy but horribly malformed being. To that civilization, the normal human body was considered inefficient. Believing they were helping, they had improved the delegates' bodies. That incident ultimately proved one undeniable truth. A monster would always remain a monster. From that day onward, every being originating from dungeons had officially been classified as an enemy. Yu Seong-un realized that dealing with this ghost would become an extremely difficult raid. Despite that, he accepted the mission. Handling incidents like this was his specialty. The employee sincerely thanked him. Yu Seong-un modestly replied that responding to incidents like these was simply his duty. Just before he left, the employee remembered one final detail. The employee revealed that the ghost incidents had begun immediately after guild leader Bisabeol placed Ho's portrait on display in basement level 5. As Yu Seong-un made his way toward the basement, he recalled several conversations with Bisabeol. The guild leader had repeatedly assigned him responsibility for new exhibits. Again and again, Bisabeol had called his name while announcing another new management assignment. Those memories made Yu Seong-un realize that this situation was far beyond a small amount of extra work. He nervously pulled a lollipop from his pocket and started eating it. He accepted that overtime was now absolutely guaranteed. Moments later, the elevator arrived at basement level 5. Curator Yu Seong-un officially began the search for Gio's portrait. Seong-un arrived at the place where the ghost was known to appear. The time was 4:29. Right in front of him, the ghost appeared, and its biodata matched the information he had already obtained. He concluded that the being was either an entity that was conscious of people's eyes, or that it could only act under certain conditions or rules. Since it was a humanoid, he considered the second possibility more likely. Its appearance cycle was irregular, so getting the chance to observe it immediately was incredibly fortunate. For now, he decided to simply observe it and verify the available data. At that moment, a system window notified him that the environmental sound adjustment skill had activated. He remembered that everyone had described the creature as so silent that it was called a ghost. However, he realized it did make a sound, although it was extremely faint. It sounded like blades of grass brushing against each other. The sound felt completely out of place for something with a 188-centimeter build. As he continued watching, he noticed the humanoid quietly admiring the artworks. The items displayed on that floor were extremely dangerous, and even the slightest careless touch could cause a massive incident. Yet the creature never touched anything. It simply observed the displays. Whether it was interested in art, passing time, or searching for an item it could use, remained impossible to tell. Its careful behavior only made it seem even more intelligent. Eventually, their eyes met. The moment their gazes locked, Seongun felt an overwhelming sense of terror. He sensed that there was something hidden within those eyes. The creature slowly began moving closer, but then he realized it had actually hidden itself behind the portrait standing in front of him. The entire situation drove him insane, and he regretted provoking it for no reason. Thus, Gio's portrait exploration day 1 came to an end. The story then shifted to Gio's world. Gio reflected on what had happened. He wondered why the man had hidden there. He believed the man must have been afraid of him. Before this, every staff member had run away after seeing him, but this time it strangely felt like he had been the one running away instead. He became determined to continue acting like a harmless portrait. He believed it would be troublesome if these misunderstandings continued to escalate. Even so, he had a strong feeling that the man would return someday. Soon afterward, several rabbits approached Gio. However, the moment he tried to pet them, they avoided him. Seeing them leave made him quietly wish that he could have a pet of his own. The next day marked the beginning of Gio's portrait exploration day 2. Standing before Gio's portrait once again, Seongun reflected on the previous encounter. Since the creature had seemed to run away the day before, he had assumed it would hide itself completely. Seeing the portrait still there filled him with relief. Now he believed the real investigation could finally begin. He concluded that the being from yesterday proved this portrait was no ordinary monster. From this point onward, his goal was to discover the portrait's rules and determine exactly what it was and whether humans could coexist with it. Even while simply standing there and looking directly into its eyes, he felt the strength draining from his entire body. After the great catastrophe, countless monsters had entered Earth. Many of them possessed unique stories that humans had to raid and uncover. There was never any guarantee that a raid attempt would succeed on the first try. Because of that, humans had no choice but to study these beings carefully if they hoped to achieve coexistence. From within the portrait, Gio initiated contact and expressed his desire to communicate. Seongun accepted the opportunity without hesitation because he understood that having a conversation with such beings had become one of humanity's ways of surviving in the present world. As the conversation began, Gio quietly evaluated Seongun's personality. He came to the conclusion that Seongun was a genuinely good person. That realization deeply moved Gio. Gio found it surprising that the man was calmly talking to a portrait without showing any fear. Seongun began by apologizing for what had happened the previous day. Gio realized that Seongun even cared about his feelings. In a world where people fought monsters the size of houses, a talking, moving portrait was apparently considered perfectly ordinary. Gio accepted the apology and assured him that there was no need to apologize. Seongun thanked him. Gio then asked for his name. Before answering, Seongun carefully considered the request. He wondered if the conversation had begun through the same process used with the 17 people before him. He knew that a person's true name carried dangerous power. Names played a vital role in contracts that bound souls together. He briefly suspected that the portrait might use his name to form some strange contract. However, based on the rules the portrait had shown so far, he concluded that revealing his real name would not suddenly place him in danger. He introduced himself as Yu Seongun. With the introductions complete, Gio invited him to ask anything he wanted. Seongun first asked whether the figure he had made eye contact with that night had actually been Gio. Gio confirmed that it was. Seongun then asked if that meant Gio could leave the portrait and move around freely. Gio admitted that he could. He also noticed that Seongun seemed flustered. Seongun realized his surprise had become visible. He never expected a non-human being to reveal such important information without hesitation. He admitted that he had not expected such an honest answer. Gio explained that there had simply been no reason to hide it. Seongun wondered what would have happened if his intentions had been malicious. Gio calmly revealed that he already knew Seongun was a good person. The answer shocked Seongun. He immediately wondered if Gio could distinguish good people from evil ones. He also began considering what might happen if someone standing before the portrait were judged to be evil. He suspected that such a person might face something far worse than being ignored. Gio invited him to continue asking questions. Seongun then brought up the mysterious ghost, wandering through the gallery and leaving behind valuable gifts. He asked whether that ghost was actually Gio. Gio remained silent for a moment. The delayed response made Seongun uneasy. After a pause, Gio focused on the word ghost. Seongun worried that he might have offended him by calling him that. so he immediately apologized. Gio finally understood why everyone had always run away from him. He explained that a talking portrait could certainly be mistaken for something possessed by a ghost. However, he had never actually died. That answer led Seongun to conclude that Gio must have existed as a portrait from the very beginning. Wanting to understand more, Seongun asked why Gio had been wandering around the gallery. Gio explained that he had simply wanted to know where he was. Privately, he reflected that he had suddenly become a portrait before being moved into the gallery. He admitted that the rare artworks had caught his interest. He had also wanted to know what kind of people worked there, how they lived, what their names were, and even what kinds of food they enjoyed. Even in a world that had changed so drastically, being alone naturally made someone seek conversation. A social life was necessary to survive. He also wanted to avoid being burned at the stake because of misunderstandings. Seongun found it strange that Gio described his curiosity in such a calm and emotionless tone. To him, Gio's interest in human lives resembled the curiosity many monsters displayed toward humanity. Gio added that this was especially true when speaking with someone as polite as Seongun. Seongun noticed that Gio seemed to have a preference for polite people. Gio admitted that, compared to the gallery's bright red leader, the staff members were much better conversation partners. Seongun immediately realized Gio was referring to guild leader Bisabeol. Gio explained that the guild leader talked far too much, making conversations difficult to keep up with. Everything suddenly made sense to Seongun. He realized the guild leader had already offended Gio. That explained why Bisabeol had assigned him the investigation, while providing almost no information. Gio had simply judged the guild leader to be rude and refused to speak with him. Seongun even felt that the guild leader had brought the situation upon himself. Even so, Seongun apologized on behalf of his guild leader and admitted that the man could be rather unusual. Gio replied that the guild leader did not seem like a bad person, so there was no problem. That answer allowed Seongun to understand another important rule. Someone who was merely rude would not become Gio's enemy unless they were truly evil. Even after effortlessly seeing through an S-class hunter and guild leader, Gio remained completely calm. The more Seongun learned, the more mysterious the portrait became. Gio once again invited him to continue asking questions. Seongun then asked about the portrait itself. He wanted to know whether Gio could still see everything outside, even when the portrait's eyes appeared closed. He also wondered if Gio had been observing everyone from inside the portrait all along. At the same time, Seongun could not understand why Gio seemed so determined to keep talking with humans. Gio explained that it was less like observing people and more like watching scenery move past a window. It reminded him of quietly looking out the window during a long bus ride. He also revealed another important rule. The portrait only opened its eyes whenever he genuinely wished to communicate with the outside world. He had confirmed this long ago by testing it with a broken mirror shard inside a burned-down school. At every other moment, the portrait's eyes remained closed, allowing him to watch the outside world safely from within. Since Seongun was standing inside the frame, Gio naturally had no choice but to watch him. He simply found moving paintings fascinating. A chill ran down Seongun's spine. He finally realized that, in Gio's eyes, the paintings were not the portrait itself. The real paintings were the humans moving outside the frame. Still recovering from that unsettling realization, Seongun admitted that Gio's blunt way of speaking constantly surprised him. Gio calmly explained that he believed he had simply been polite. To him, proper manners were something every human should naturally follow. Despite everything he had learned, Seongun genuinely enjoyed the conversation. With that, Gio's portrait investigation day, too, officially came to an end. After leaving the gallery, Seongun immediately reported back to guild leader Bisabeol. He firmly declared that the being inside the portrait was dangerous. Bisabeol simply smiled before asking exactly which being Seongun was referring to. Seongun immediately clarified that he was talking about the portrait. He explained that Gio was completely different from every monster humanity had encountered before. Those monsters overwhelmed people with their twisted goodwill until they suffocated beneath it. The most alarming part was that Gio genuinely recognized himself as human. Even so, Seongun could not tell whether Gio truly believed he was human or simply wanted to believe it. If something ever went wrong, the consequences could be unimaginable. He continued explaining that Gio possessed his own concept of good and evil. He judged others according to his own standards. Seongun could not imagine how Gio would react if he ever encountered someone truly evil. Because of that, he suggested sending the portrait to the Hunter Association as research material. Bisabeol calmly admitted that he had expected Seongun to reach that conclusion. However, the more he heard about Gio, the more convinced he became that Seongun was simply doing something kind. Instead of approving the proposal, he instructed Seongun to continue talking with Jio. He wanted Seongun to become close to him and eventually introduce them, since he did not want to go through the trouble of being ignored again. He also asked Seongun to discover what Jio liked. Although he admitted it was an extremely personal request, Seongun accepted the task. Since it was his job, he intended to fulfill it without complaint. Bisabiol could only wonder why all of his employees remained so unfazed. Seongun replied that perhaps it was because the guild leader only recruited people like that. As he reflected on the conversation, Seongun realized Bisabiol's obsession with collecting extended far beyond rare objects. Every employee in the Collector Guild had been personally chosen, trained and transferred by the guild leader himself. Regardless of a hunter's rank, Bisabiol never recruited anyone carelessly. If merely standing in Jio's presence was enough to overwhelm hunters with such strong wills and cloud their judgment, then the only conclusion Seongun could reach was that the grade of Jio's soul was extraordinary. He promised to continue submitting regular reports. Bisabiol dismissed him. As Seongun left, he could not help wondering whether the guild leader was actually planning to destroy the world. Soon afterward, Jio's portrait exploration day 3 began. Seongun started by asking whether Jio ever felt lonely. Jio replied that he did not. Seongun apologized for asking such a personal question. Since only gallery employees ever visited the exhibition, he had assumed Jio occasionally left the portrait to ease his loneliness. He admitted it had only been a guess. Jio explained that he actually preferred places without people. Living there suited him perfectly. Seongun then wondered whether Jio simply disliked talking. Jio denied that completely. Instead, he explained that he had already spent far too much of his life speaking. He had always imagined a future where he would not have to keep talking endlessly. He wanted a life where he did not have to speak too much, carry too many burdens, or constantly worry about everything. To him, living inside the portrait perfectly matched that dream. Seongun then asked whether Jio had once been human. Jio immediately corrected him by insisting that he was still human. Trying to rephrase the question more carefully, Seongun asked whether Jio had once lived as an ordinary human before becoming trapped inside a painting. Jio confirmed that he had. That answer made Seongun think even more deeply. Humanoid monsters generally fell into two categories. Some were born as monsters before gradually evolving into human forms. Others began as humans, but eventually became part of the root and transformed into monsters. He wondered if Jio belonged to the second category. Perhaps that was why he continued insisting that he was a person. If that was true, however, the situation became even stranger. Monsters that retained memories of their human lives were usually consumed by powerful negative emotions. Yet Jio felt unbelievably tranquil. It was not the peaceful calm of someone living happily. Instead, it resembled the silence of someone standing at a funeral, quietly mourning a death. Seongun then asked whether Jio ever became bored. Jio casually replied that he simply ate. The answer completely shocked Seongun. He could hardly believe that a painting could eat. Looking at Jio's expressionless face, he found it impossible to imagine him enjoying food. His appearance suggested someone who would never be emotionally moved by anything. For a brief moment, Seongun even feared the ingredients might somehow involve humans. Wanting to be certain, he asked what Jio actually ate. Jio explained that he simply cooked the food he liked, prepared everything himself, and then enjoyed eating it because he was an ordinary human. Privately, Jio found the question rather strange. Meanwhile, Seongun felt that the explanation only made Jio sound even less human. Jo soon realized what Seongun was truly curious about. He understood that Seongun wanted to learn the rules governing the portrait and what was possible inside it. Interestingly, Jio admitted that he had been wondering about the exact same thing. He had also been trying to discover the portrait's limits and capabilities. With that in mind, he decided to ask Yu Seongun to help him test something he had been curious about. Jio explained that there were certain pleasures he could only experience because he lived inside the portrait. Curious, Seongun asked how that worked. Jio replied that it required a little help and that Seongun himself could bring him joy. Wanting to know what he meant, Seongun asked what kind of joy Jio was talking about. Jio requested something unexpectedly simple. He asked Seongun to draw an apple on the portrait. Although touching a valuable artwork felt deeply unpleasant, Seongun took out his drawing supplies and prepared to do it. Jio noticed the materials and wondered whether Seongun always carried art supplies with him. Seongun explained that he tried to carry a wide variety of useful items, since he never knew what might happen inside the gallery. Preparing for every possible situation was the safest approach. As he spoke, he realized the current situation perfectly proved the value of that habit. Without his drawing tools, he would never have been able to fulfill Gio's request. Seongun carefully painted an apple onto the portrait. To his complete astonishment, Gio immediately began eating the drawn apple right before his eyes. Seongun was left stunned after seeing Gio eat the apple that had just been drawn. The painted apple even had a real scent and taste. Gio calmly explained that he was an ordinary human, living inside a painting. He believed that, by the same logic, living inside the painting should allow him to accomplish many extraordinary things. Whenever he did not feel like cooking, he simply drew a finished meal and ate it. Seongun immediately realized that ordinary humans could never do something like that. Gio accepted that Seongun found it strange. Wanting to repay Seongun's kindness for drawing the apple, Gio decided to give him something in return. Seongun wondered what Gio was about to do this time. Gio felt grateful because Seongun had kindly drawn an apple, even after a portrait on the wall suddenly asked for one. He then began drawing something colorful. Gio recalled that after opening his eyes inside the portrait, he had tested many different things. Among those experiments, he also tried painting gems. He turned those gems into paint and used them for his artwork. The paints and the completed pictures felt as though they were alive. Inside the portrait, where he could even create warm corpses, almost nothing seemed impossible. Because of that, he became curious about what would happen if his creations connected to the reality outside the frame. He then drew a colorful gemstone. As expected, he discovered that his abilities were not completely without restrictions. Still, he considered it a suitable token of gratitude. Gio handed the gemstone to Seongun as his gift of thanks. Seongun was amazed that the gem had been created simply by drawing it. He examined it closely. Gio admitted that he did not know what type of gem it was. He believed it must have originally existed deep underground, where the heat was intense enough to burn. It came from a place close enough to the planet's heart that it had inherited heat from his friend. At that moment, Seongun became certain that the portrait was not a monster. Gio's portrait exploration. Day 3 came to an end. Afterward, Seongun handed the gemstone to Sabeol and reported everything he had observed so far. He explained that the root was a transcendent existence that maintained the balance of every universe and dimension while creating the rules that governed them. It functioned like a system and stood as the god above all gods. The dungeons that swallowed Earth 30 years earlier were stories of new dimensions born from the vein of the root. Monsters had emerged inside those dungeons in the same way. That was the knowledge possessed by the gardeners. Monsters were born from dungeons. The root's children were born directly from the root. Although their origins and natures were completely different, Gio resembled neither of them. Even more astonishingly, Gio had also created living beings other than himself. As time passed, Gio's portrait exploration reached day 6. When Seongun visited again, he found the portrait filled with numerous animals. Gio considered them his new family. The creatures flew freely around inside the portrait. Seongun realized that Gio had personally created them. There were around 100 of them. Gio described them as chatterboxes. He imagined they would be unbearably noisy if they actually had vocal cords. The birds gathered together to form a pond. They also enjoyed placing different objects inside their bodies to decorate themselves. Each bird had its own unique preferences, making them enjoyable to observe. Seongun wondered whether the birds possessed souls. He realized this was something even monsters could not accomplish. Gio admitted that he did not know the answer. Seongun reflected that the root's children possessed no ego and could not even hold conversations. He also sensed no divinity from Gio, making it unlikely that Gio was a god. Instead, Seongun concluded that Gio was certainly a painting while also remaining human. He recognized Gio as a being capable of influencing reality itself. Through his drawings, Gio could create fate, history, and memories. Even so, whether he could create actual human beings remained unknown. Gio believed it might be possible, but it also might not. However, he had no desire to attempt such a thing. Creating humans felt deeply unsettling to him. He believed humanity was something far too special. He insisted that he himself was not that special. He asked Seongun not to think of him as someone extraordinary. Seongun promised to be careful. Later, Seongun returned to Sabeol and discussed his findings. He admitted that all he truly understood so far was the story surrounding the portrait. He still had no answers regarding its techniques, the true grade of its soul, or the role Gio held within the root. Since Gio was an existence whose influence on humanity remained unknown, Seongun believed there was no better place than the association to analyze Gio's portrait. He considered that to be the best choice for humanity. Sabeol only smiled. He had no interest in turning the portrait into a weapon. What he wanted was artwork. That was the very reason he had founded both his guild and his company. He admitted that he still had pride as an artist. As a hunter, however, he possessed no pride at all. He explained that no collector expected an artisan's masterpiece to ward off evil spirits or grant pleasant dreams. He simply wished to understand the story contained within the painting. More than anything, he wanted to preserve that story completely with his own hands. In the end, he accepted that no one could stop what was unfolding. Sizing up the threat, Sabiol compared Gio to a natural disaster, whose power depended on impossible luck. The rare gems and magical materials Gio produced proved he was friendly, leading the guild to classify the encounter as nothing short of a miracle. Sabiol believed destroying such a miracle would be a terrible mistake, explaining that he had rushed to buy the painting at auction to keep it from falling into the wrong hands and causing catastrophe. Relaxing afterward, Sabiol revealed that his unique perception allowed him to see beyond appearances. He concluded that the best approach was to treat Gio like an ordinary person, because Gio himself preferred living that way. Meanwhile, Gio quietly continued his peaceful daily routine, preparing meals so extraordinary that glowing golden birds seemed to come to life from his cooking. Sabiol explained that Gio was an ascended existence with no hostility, praising his kindness, patience, manners, and reluctance to harm anyone despite possessing overwhelming power. Although others struggled to understand this conclusion, Sabiol insisted a single glance had told him everything and claimed such insight was necessary to lead the guild. As the meeting ended, Sabiol assigned Seongun one task: become Gio's companion without digging too deeply into his true nature. He even instructed Seongun to occasionally take the painting outside for walks. Though stunned by the order, Seongun accepted the mission and trusted Sabiol's judgment. After Seongun left, Sabiol reflected alone, revealing his mysterious eyes that saw far beyond normal limits. His ultimate goal was simply to provide Gio with the finest treatment possible. Walking through the city at night, Seongun felt relieved that Gio had not fallen into the association's hands. Knowing captured entities were subjected to cruel experiments, memories returned of the sacred gardens, where chosen gardeners partnered with origin entities to reduce dungeon threats. Those experiences had created deep emotional bonds with the magical gardens. Passing a street food stall, Seongun remembered Gio's love of food and bought traditional snacks. Deciding to treat Gio like an ordinary person, he returned to the gallery with the sweets. Back underground, Seongun casually asked Gio's age. Gio revealed he was 29, surprising Seongun, who was 33. Seongun admitted he had expected someone in Gio's position to be much older, then quickly apologized after realizing the comment sounded awkward. Gio seemed slightly offended by being thought older than he was, but the conversation quickly recovered. Gio then asked Seongun's age and complimented his youthful appearance. Their conversation became increasingly natural as Seongun offered him the snacks. Since Gio was younger, he suggested dropping formal speech, and Seongun happily agreed, making their friendship feel much more comfortable. By the 17th day of the investigation, Seongun had learned that the sacred gardens were essential parts of the world's balance. Gio praised the gardeners' difficult work and empathized with the burden they carried. Seongun explained that those chosen for the role had no choice but to accept it. Before ending their conversation, Seongun handed Gio a pouch of rare seeds. Even after many days together, seeing Gio's hand extend from the painting still startled him. Noticing his reaction, Gio gently checked on Seongun's condition. Seongun reassured him that he was fine and easily adapted to the strange sight. As Seongun spoke fondly about the beauty of vast magical gardens, Gio quietly listened and understood the weight of his responsibilities. Seongun felt that Gio truly understood his struggles. Elsewhere, Sabiol hinted that his plans reached far beyond what anyone realized. Back in the gallery, Seongun politely invited Gio to leave the painting for a short sightseeing trip outside. Gio was surprised by the unexpected invitation, but calmly confirmed that it was simply a casual outing. Sabiol explains that inviting an origin-linked entity into reality is extremely dangerous because no one knows the true limits of the mysterious artist's powers. Since eliminating him is impossible, they decide to observe him early. Back in the chat, Seongun offers to personally guide Gio through modern society. Believing it's finally time to step back into the real world, Gio accepts, and they begin planning the best time to meet. Inside the painting, Gio places the jewel beside his magical bird, while admitting he's mentally exhausted. Remembering how everyone outside froze in fear just by looking at him, he realizes his overwhelming powers distort reality itself. People couldn't even properly perceive him because of the massive gap between his existence and ordinary humans. Although their terrified reactions surprised him, he refuses to let it bother him. While watering his crops, Gio decides to solve this perception problem before meeting the investigator. After finishing his work, he proudly admires his beautiful garden, satisfied that all his effort paid off. Cleaning himself up, he playfully praises his golden bird for being adorable. Unlike the ordinary birds, this one clearly understands him, so he decides it deserves a proper name. His first idea, Golden Boy, immediately makes both him and the bird cringe. Embarrassed, he laughs at himself before choosing the name Hihoni instead. The happy bird rubs against his face, making Gio smile as he thanks it for accepting such a simple name. Returning to the cabin, Gio finishes the last painting before finally getting some well-deserved rest. As he paints a violent ocean, the system suddenly activates and begins searching for a matching dimension. Strange visions of ruined worlds, shadowy figures, and a terrifying demon flash before his eyes. Moments later, the system successfully links the painting to its correct dimension. Completely drained, Gio collapses onto his bed and falls asleep. The next morning, Gio wakes up refreshed, only to find a giant notification window waiting for him. Curious, he checks the system and discovers his ocean painting has been officially named Breathing Sea. The system has also automatically named all of his other completed artworks. As he reads further, Gio learns that every painting can connect to another dimension through a compatible player. Unsure whether it's actually safe, he hesitates while Hihoni lands on his shoulder, calming him down. Soon his curiosity wins, and he begins exploring the feature. The help menu explains that a compatible player serves as a guide through unexplored dimensions. The system automatically selects someone whose core traits perfectly match Gio's, allowing him to temporarily inhabit that person's body with permission. Looking through the suggested candidates, Jiovanni and Argo, Gio first jokes that the system simply matched similar names, before realizing it probably performed a much deeper compatibility search. Excited by the endless possibilities, he feels he'll never be bored again. His attention then shifts to the dark city painting he created. To his surprise, the system warns that the world doesn't actually exist, meaning Gio accidentally created an entirely new dimension from scratch. Accepting the challenge, Gio jokes that his peaceful life keeps turning into chaos. Just then, another reminder appears about fixing his perception problem. Smiling confidently, he decides this is the perfect opportunity to test everything. Gio selects Jiovanni as his compatible player and begins the dimensional transfer, telling Hihoni to trust him. During the journey, he complains about the rough teleportation before noticing his bird has disappeared. After arriving, Gio finds himself inside a silent white world resembling an abandoned hospital. Suddenly, a handsome, long-haired blonde man approaches with an elegant, noble presence. Gio is left speechless when he realizes the stranger looks exactly like him. Smiling warmly, the mysterious man introduces himself as Jiovanni of the prestigious Batland clan. Gio respectfully introduces himself and realizes he has finally met his compatible player. Seeing how similar they look, he jokes that they could almost be the same person. Jiovanni smiles, believing their connection goes far beyond appearances. Gio admits he has never been good at smiling, and his serious face has always made people misunderstand him. Jiovanni finds that relatable, and believes Gio will eventually learn to smile naturally. Curious about the synchronization, Gio asks if the process is truly safe. Jiovanni explains that there is nothing to lose because he has already passed away. His homeland was swallowed by the ocean, leaving nothing behind except its memories. Although overwhelmed by the tragic story, Gio continues listening. Jiovanni reveals that only the mermaids survived, while their world became an isolated realm with strict rules. Gio connects this to the mysterious dimensions Song once described. Jiovanni explains that, despite coming from different worlds, their souls share an extraordinary compatibility. Through synchronization, they will continue creating memories together, allowing his existence to live on through the origin. Since nobody truly understands the origin, Jiovanni simply accepts it as fate. Before parting, he entrusts Gio with protecting the forgotten sun god of his ruined world. At first, Gio doubts he can handle such a responsibility. However, after learning that forgotten gods eventually disappear, he agrees to occasionally keep the lonely deity company. In return, he will gain access to the god's divine power. Jiovanni then reveals one final wish involving his beloved student, asking Gio to grant the child a peaceful end after the destruction of their underwater kingdom. Back in the sanctuary, Honey quietly waits beside the glowing jewel, while Gio's real body remains frozen in the gallery. The system records Giovanni's requests, as the room suddenly turns freezing cold. As synchronization begins, unbearable pain overwhelms Gio. Foreign memories flood his mind. His black hair gradually turns blonde, and Giovanni's tragic final moments become his own. Unable to resist the emotional flood, Gio quietly accepts everything. Once the synchronization reaches completion, he loses consciousness with no regrets. The story then shifts to a modern city, where the wealthy collector Bizabil confidently prepares new security measures for dealing with the mysterious newcomer Gio. The next morning, the organization's headquarters erupts with rumors after strict rules regarding Gio are announced. As everyone studies the unusual regulations, they begin wondering whether the mysterious hooded employee is truly human or something far more terrifying. The company's strange new regulations leave every employee confused. Since their eccentric boss never makes jokes during official announcements, everyone assumes the situation is deadly serious. Before long, the staff reaches the same conclusion. The mysterious hooded man is no ordinary human, so showing him complete respect is the only safe choice. Although many employees grumble about the absurd rules, no one dares question them. The security team eventually realizes the new employee is the same terrifying being connected to the painting sealed in the 5th basement. Meanwhile, Seongun praises his team for preventing any problems so far. He believes strict manners will keep everyone safe and stop unnecessary incidents inside the headquarters. Sabiol agrees but warns that revealing Gio's true identity could cause nationwide panic. To avoid that, they decide to introduce him to the public as an S-class hunter, believing that hiding his true nature will reduce the overall danger. Satisfied with the plan, Seongun arranges a luxury hotel for Gio and assigns Sabiol to personally guide him. Although the responsibility makes him nervous, Sabiol accepts the mission. When he reaches the 5th basement, he is surprised to find Gio already waiting outside the painting. Even more shocking, Gio's overwhelming aura and emotionless presence have completely disappeared. Gio explains that he deliberately suppressed his powers so ordinary people would no longer fear him. The dramatic change leaves Seongun completely astonished. Over the past 2 days, Gio had remained inside the painting while slowly adapting to Giovanni's powers. As the synchronization reaches 4%, Giovanni's memories, emotions, and gentle personality gradually become part of Gio. At the same time, Gio regains many ordinary human traits. Hunger, sleep, and the ability to enjoy food all return, while his terrifying aura becomes calm enough for normal people to approach without fear. Back in the gallery, Gio mentions that he's hungry, prompting Seongun to begin the long-awaited tour. Although still cautious, Seongun is amazed by how naturally human Gio now behaves. While walking through the building, Seongun realizes Gio is constantly suppressing his own power, despite the pain it causes, simply to protect everyone around him. Witnessing such kindness only increases his concern that others might one day take advantage of Gio's gentle nature. The tour finally reaches the outside world. Stepping into the modern city for the first time in years, Gio quietly admires the bustling streets, towering skyscrapers, and thriving civilization that had emerged after the Great Cataclysm. Watching Gio's excitement, Seongun relaxed, amused that people casually carried giant weapons through the streets. Hunters with wings, heavy armor, and intimidating appearances reflected how humanity had adapted after the cataclysm. Noticing curious stares, Seongun realized Gio still radiated the presence of a high-class monster even while suppressing his power, so he advised him to keep his hood on to avoid attention from rival guilds. Gio agreed. Pointing to the elevated railway, Seongun said they would take the modern train to a famous restaurant. Gio marveled that civilization had advanced so much in only 31 years. At the crowded station, Seongun used a corporate pass for VIP access and handed Gio an unlimited company card to buy anything he wanted. Gio accepted it carefully, surprised by the trust. Riding a glass elevator overlooking the city, Gio noticed how empty public transportation was. Seongun explained tickets were too expensive. On the train, Gio observed that capitalism had survived the apocalypse, while Seongun remarked that the gap between rich and poor had only grown. Checking the time, Seongun noted the train should have been crowded during morning rush hour. Shocked by the nearly empty carriage, Gio learned most hunters started work around 7 each morning, concluding that human rights had practically disappeared and that becoming a painting had been an unexpected blessing. As snow fell, Gio remembered the sweets Seongun had given him and promised to repay the kindness. Seongun refused, instead mentioning delicious street food before realizing Gio might not know it. Gio quietly appreciated being treated like an ordinary person. Seongun promised to look for a food stall, but explained that strict regulations had forced many vendors out of business. The conversation turned to society's class system. Showing his official ID, Seongun explained the government's 5-tier ranking. The highest class enjoyed the greatest privileges. Lower-ranked city residents lost status through poor income or unstable jobs. Rural citizens were third class. Unregistered border residents fourth, and criminals fifth after losing almost all legal protection. When Gio asked why, Seongun said constant dungeon threats forced society to prioritize security over equality. Walking through a beautiful district, Seongun explained that powerful monsters had reshaped the world. Massive defensive walls protected cities, while monster materials enabled advanced technology. Demonstrating magic, he described how elite hunters defended cities, while abandoned provinces struggled with danger and shortages. They arrived at an elegant restaurant, which Seongun proudly chose, because none of its dishes used monster ingredients. Over lunch, he reflected on how ordinary life had changed after the Great Cataclysm. Gio was amazed the world had transformed so completely in only 31 years, though the excellent meal reminded him that simple joys still remained. Afterward, they strolled beside a warm, artificial canal, despite the winter weather. Seongun explained that terraforming magic had turned the district into a giant greenhouse. Gio admired an unfamiliar bird and fed it seeds. Seongun revealed it was a utility monster, raised for valuable crafting materials. As more birds gathered, Gio was delighted to see humans and monsters coexisting peacefully. Seongun suggested relaxing by dipping their feet into the warm canal. Sitting beside the crystal-clear water, Gio noticed it smelled like the ocean, despite being in the middle of the city. The moment he realized it, an overwhelming surge of magical energy burst from him. The canal exploded into violent waves as mana fluctuated wildly. Gio's hood slipped away, revealing his long, glowing hair. Horrified, Seongun called out in panic, struggling to understand the terrifying transformation before him. Holding an unbreakable Zin-like aura despite his welcoming appearance, Gio calmly nodded when Seongun questioned him. Introducing himself, he insisted his username had never changed. Though beneath his composure, he struggled to hide his fear. Later, at a 5-star hotel, Seongun gave Gio the key to a luxury suite, confirmed their dinner plans, and wished him a good rest. As soon as he returned to his own room, he collapsed to the floor, drenched in cold sweat. The terrifying image from the canal convinced Seongun that Gio was not human. He realized the being had introduced itself differently. Gio normally said his full username, but after the surge of power, it answered with only the first part when asked for its original name, revealing an identity centered on its godlike existence. Blaming himself for lowering his guard, Seongun concluded he was sharing a hotel with an unstoppable force, merely pretending to be human. Meanwhile, Gio relaxed on the soft bed, admitting modern society was intimidating. After resting, he admired the view from the 45th floor, until hunger struck, revealing the tiny bird hidden beneath his cape. He regretted he could not feed it inside the hotel. The bird affectionately nuzzled him, as he happily promised to make it something sweet after returning home, completely unaware of the terror he had caused. Outside, Seongun reviewed the day's events. Relieved nothing disastrous had happened, he prayed the monster was only trying to imitate humans. Though the canal incident continued haunting him, he recalled their earlier speedboat ride, when Gio's mere presence disturbed the water. As Gio suddenly stood, the boat rocked violently. Seongun warned he was frightening the driver, but Gio explained he had simply been fascinated by the canal. Though Seongun accepted the apology, he pointed out the canal smelled like the ocean, and that Gio had looked ready to jump in. Gio replied he had only stood because he feared Seongun might fall. Choosing not to argue, Seongun instead asked whether Gio liked the sea. Looking at the towering canal walls, Gio hesitated as the lingering emotions of the priest Jiovanni, who loved the ocean, blended with his own. After reflecting, he concluded he did like the sea, leaving Seongun confused by the contradictory answer. Changing the subject, Gio asked about mermaids. Alarmed, Seongun explained that aquatic creatures appeared in flooded regions and often resembled mythical beings. After the Great Cataclysm, humanity's belief had turned ancient myths, legends, and urban stories into real monsters, transforming Earth into a giant dungeon governed by game-like rules. At that moment, Gio's system displayed 2 new quests. speak with the sun god, and eliminate the Little Mermaid. Before discussing them further, they arrived at an elegant restaurant built inside the shell of a giant sea monster. During lunch, Seongun explained that the restaurant itself was a static dungeon. Since Geo knew nothing about modern dungeons, he described the types. Static dungeons stayed fixed, while roaming dungeons wandered unpredictably and trapped people under bizarre conditions, such as a man in his 30s entering a convenience store at night. Geo found the idea absurd because people could die simply for buying snacks, and Seongun admitted such dungeons spread constant fear despite being rare. He added that static dungeons permanently replaced parts of Earth with foreign landscapes. This marine-themed dungeon had been cleared not through combat, but because an ordinary chef awakened special abilities and impressed the dungeon master with exceptional cooking. Proving strength was not always the answer. Geo smiled at the story, until Seongun revealed the chef was now 92 years old, and still working because awakened hunters aged far more slowly. The thought of still working in his 90s genuinely horrified Geo. Seongun continued by explaining village-type dungeons, which permanently transformed entire regions, and gateway dungeons, which randomly connected Earth to other dimensions, like game-level select screens. Satisfied, Geo said he understood everything. When Seongun asked about the meal, Geo warmly praised it for reminding him of the happy dinners he once shared with his beloved companions. His radiant smile briefly left Seongun speechless, and despite knowing the truth, he felt genuinely happy seeing Geo enjoy himself. Soon, nearby diners began whispering while staring at them. Hoping to avoid attention, Seongun suggested leaving, reminding Geo that humans were naturally social. To lighten the mood, Seongun proposed visiting Jayangbogung Palace. The name awakened memories of Geo's former life as a teacher, and the joyful school trips he had shared with his students. Quietly wondering whether those children had survived this transformed world, Geo smiled gently and gladly accepted the invitation. Geo and Seongun arrived at a magnificent traditional palace, illuminated by floating lanterns. As they walked through the historic courtyard, Seongun thanked the event staff while escorting his dangerous guest. Admiring his traditional outfit, Geo received a compliment from Seongun, which reminded him that he had once escorted others here as a teacher, but had never worn such elegant clothes himself. He fondly recalled school trips, especially organizing children for group photos, before admiring how beautifully magic had blended with the ancient palace. Pointing at glowing spirits drifting through the sky, Geo asked what they were called. Surprised, Seongun explained they were living fairy tales, and wondered if it was Geo's first time seeing them. Geo confirmed it, explaining that true children of the origin rarely wandered among humans. Curious, Seongun handed him a street snack. While eating, Geo explained that the origin was the cosmic force that created and sustained every world. Seongun realized he was describing the foundation of magic itself. Geo added that the spirits were born from that source, merely imitated human ideas, and could perfectly disguise themselves. When Seongun asked if ordinary people could see them, Geo replied that such individuals were extremely rare. Recalling history, Seongun explained that almost no one could see them, until Earth's transformation after the dungeon disasters awakened that ability in humans. Assuming Geo was simply an exceptionally gifted awakened individual, he praised how naturally he blended into society. Geo casually replied that he had obtained his magic from an old painting, nearly making Seongun choke. Their conversation was interrupted by a violent argument in the courtyard. As security restrained the troublemakers, Seongun expected them to be removed, but a system window suddenly assigned Geo a mandatory mission to evaluate one of the men. Confused, Geo watched as Seongun calmly explained security was handling it. Although the man looked like an ordinary victim, Seongun secretly analyzed him and discovered an overwhelming danger level. Cold sweat covered his face as he questioned whether someone so dangerous should be free, while Geo simply continued walking. When Seongun stared at him, Geo innocently wondered if he had spent too long watching the fight. The tension broke as Honey suddenly popped out from beneath Geo's cape with an excited chirp. Geo hurriedly hid the tiny bird again, though Seongun realized it was pointless. After calming down, Seongun asked whether the adorable bird was the giant water monster from earlier. Geo proudly corrected him, introducing the bird as Honey. Completely overwhelmed, Seongun sighed, convinced disaster was inevitable, and wondering how he could ever report such absurd events to the guild. Seeing Seongun's exhausted expression, Geo mistakenly assumed he had become a burden. Feeling guilty, he suggested ending the tour and returning to the hotel. Seongun happily agreed, promising to buy more spicy snacks along the way, making Gio laugh. Meanwhile, the criminal expelled from the palace secretly watched them from a dark alley. Remembering Gio's terrifying aura, and recognizing Seongun as Sabaeol Guild's famous curator, he concluded Gio had to be an incredibly powerful awakened hunter. Terrified that Gio might expose his years-long infiltration of the Sun cult, he decided the only solution was to kill him. Just then, Honey landed alone on nearby pipes. Believing Gio was merely a weak tamer, the criminal mocked his carelessness and lunged to capture the bird. The instant he attacked, Honey erupted with overwhelming heat, shattered the mystical gem, and unleashed a devastating blast that completely erased the criminal without leaving a trace. Back at the luxury hotel, Gio suddenly felt his magical bond with Honey violently shake. His glowing eyes snapped open, as he sensed his beloved companion had been harmed. Moonlight filled the quiet room, as Gio anxiously searched for Honey, softly calling the bird's name. Stopping beside the untouched bed, he realized Honey was truly gone. Gripping his shirt, sorrow overwhelmed him, as he believed he had lost his only precious companion. Looking out at the lonely hotel beneath the cold night sky, Gio sadly lamented that this world would not even allow him a peaceful life, leaving him on the verge of tears. The scene shifted to the roadside candy shop, where the shopkeeper revealed that he had been seeing strange beings ever since he was a child. A flashback showed his childhood, where he pointed towards something only he could see. His friend insisted that no one was there, and assumed he had spotted a monster. The young boy looked carefully once again, and realized it was not a monster. He quickly dismissed it as his imagination, to avoid drawing attention. However, the truth was different. A shadow-like figure was clearly standing nearby, proving that his eyes had not deceived him. The shopkeeper explained that these beings sometimes took on human-like appearances. Even though they looked familiar, he always knew they were completely different from animals and plants. He also revealed that truly dangerous creatures appeared from time to time. On many occasions, he had even seen monsters wandering around ordinary people. Although he never understood exactly how they caused people's deaths, he never sensed any malice from them. Even so, their existence alone was enough to threaten human lives. Since they normally caused no harm, unless disturbed, he had chosen to spend his entire life pretending that he could not see them. Back in the present, Gio arrived at the shop with his pet bird, Honey, to buy some food. As Honey looked around and asked about the price of a bag, the shopkeeper froze in complete shock. At that moment, he recalled that Cha Eun-hyuk was the older brother supporting his younger sister, Cha, an F-rank hunter, and his youngest sister, Cha Izul, who had awakened as a priest. Despite being only a third-class citizen, he carried the burden of supporting his entire family. The shopkeeper immediately realized that the moment had finally come, when avoiding these mysterious beings was no longer possible. Honey had spoken like a real person, and its behavior was so perfectly human that it completely shattered everything he believed possible. The shopkeeper nervously revealed that a bag of 10 bunjopang cost 5,000 won. Gio then asked if card payments were accepted. The shopkeeper hesitated and admitted that he preferred cash, but also accepted cards. After hearing that, Gio took out his card and requested one bag. The moment the shopkeeper saw the card, fear filled his mind. He wondered if refusing the sale would cost him his life. Trying to stay calm, he explained that he had just sold the last batch and needed time to prepare a fresh one. Gio calmly agreed and decided to wait. As the shopkeeper prepared the order, he noticed that even the card appeared completely legitimate. He briefly wondered if it had been stolen, but quickly dismissed the thought because he could not imagine why a monster would need something like that. Looking at Gio and the mysterious bird beside him, he considered the possibility that Gio might be a bird tamer. Even so, both of them carried the same unsettling presence as the strange beings he had seen throughout his life. Among them, Honey felt especially terrifying. Despite its harmless appearance, the shopkeeper believed that innocent look was nothing more than a perfect disguise. Once the fresh batch was ready, the shopkeeper handed over the bag of bungopang. Gio thanked him for the food. Before leaving, Gio handed him a shining crystal as a gift. The unexpected gesture left the shopkeeper completely stunned. Gio explained that he had interrupted the shopkeeper's work and forced him to prepare everything again, so he wanted the crystal to serve as both an apology and a token of gratitude. The shopkeeper insisted that such a gift was unnecessary. However, Gio quietly left the crystal behind and walked away. The shopkeeper watched Gio leave and finally let out a deep sigh of relief, convinced that he had somehow survived the most terrifying encounter of his life. Ever since he was a child, he had been able to see strange beings that ordinary people could not. Because of that, he had always believed that one day he would meet a bizarre and unexplainable death. At the very least, he expected to die in some mysterious way. And after meeting Gio, he was certain that day had finally arrived. Just as he began to calm down, he suddenly sensed another enormous monster approaching. Fear instantly returned, but when he looked closely, he realized it was only Gio's pet bird, Honey. To his complete disbelief, Honey quietly picked up the shining crystal that Gio had left behind as a gift and flew away with it as if it had come back specifically for that purpose. That single incident frightened the poor shopkeeper so badly that he decided he could no longer stay there. He resolved to move his stall to a completely different location the very next day, hoping he would never cross paths with Gio again. Unfortunately, his luck turned out to be unbelievably terrible. Early the next morning, while he was running his stall at the new location, Seongun arrived with Gio to buy some food. The moment Seongun saw him, he immediately recognized the vendor from the Collector Guild building and casually ordered a bag of bunjapang. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper froze on the spot. He was completely stunned and mentally traumatized, wondering how the world could possibly be so small. Seongun noticed that the vendor had disappeared from his old spot and assumed he had simply moved to a new location. Trying his best to stay calm, the shopkeeper explained that he could not remain in the same place for too long because the inspectors would eventually catch him. As he spoke, he noticed that Gio was standing beside someone who looked like a first-class hunter. That observation made him even more convinced that Gio himself was also a hunter. Unable to suppress his curiosity any longer, the shopkeeper cautiously asked if Gio was a Tamer hunter. Before the conversation could continue, Gio thanked the shopkeeper once again for everything that had happened the previous day. Those words immediately caught Seongun's attention. Surprised, he asked what had happened yesterday. Gio calmly explained that Honey had wandered off, so he had gone out to search for his pet bird, completely unaware of the terrifying misunderstanding the poor shopkeeper had gone through. Seongun immediately reminded Gio that he should always inform him before going anywhere alone. Gio calmly explained that he had found Honey almost immediately. However, Seongun pointed out that finding the bird quickly was never the real issue. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper became so emotional that tears of relief almost filled his eyes. He finally convinced himself that his suspicions had been correct. In his mind, Gio was clearly a dangerous existence who needed to be kept under the control of a first-class hunter. Looking back at the previous day, he realized he had nearly lost his life simply by selling a bag of bunjapang. Seongun then confirmed that Gio was indeed a tamer hunter and politely asked if something unusual had happened. The shopkeeper immediately explained everything. After Gio bought the bunjapang, the bird called Honey had suddenly grown to an enormous size before biting his head twice and flying away. Gio was completely shocked after hearing the story. Seongun then asked Gio what he thought about the situation. Without making any excuses, Gio sincerely apologized and asked whether the shopkeeper had been injured. Still nervous, the shopkeeper admitted that it had not really hurt and had felt more like a strange prank than an actual attack. Even so, Gio apologized once again and awkwardly explained that his son could be childish at times. Those words completely confused Seongun. He could not understand why Gio had just referred to a bird as his son. A moment later, Gio removed the cloak covering his head and revealed his second appearance, the blonde-haired Jiovanni. With a gentle smile, Jiovanni politely asked the shopkeeper for permission to examine him for any injuries. He explained that he was a doctor and knew how to properly inspect wounds. Seongun was left speechless once again. He knew Gio possessed the memories of a 29-year-old human named Seo Gio, but he had never imagined that the man had actually been a doctor. Jiovanni continued smiling politely at the frightened shopkeeper, leaving the poor man completely stunned by the unexpected kindness. Meanwhile, the scene shifted elsewhere, where a mysterious woman with a bizarre creature-like appearance searched the area for someone. As she followed the trail, she suddenly realized it ended there. She wondered if the one she had deliberately chosen had already been defeated. The strange-looking lady quietly reflects on the mysterious disappearance of the priest. Neither the Temple of the Sun nor the media has any idea about what happened to him. There are no signs of a struggle at the scene, and there is not even a single clue suggesting that the priest managed to escape. As she thinks about the situation, a sly smirk appears on her face. She had originally planned to ruin the upcoming Festival of the Sun and cause chaos during the important event. However, the person who was supposed to carry out that plan has suddenly vanished without leaving behind any trace. Despite this unexpected setback, the lady does not seem worried. Instead, she calmly turns her attention towards someone named Iser. She refers to Iser as her one and only galaxy, showing that the two share a close and unusual connection. The lady then tells Iser that she will now have to take over the job that was originally meant for the missing person. Since the original plan can no longer be carried out as intended, Iser will have to step in and complete the task herself. Standing before the strange-looking lady, Iser appears almost identical to her in appearance. She then confidently assures the lady that she will not disappoint her and will make sure to complete the task successfully. Hearing Iser's confident response, the strange lady breaks into a wide grin. She tells Iser not to act so stiff or serious about the situation. According to her, there is no need for such tension, because they are all doing this for one simple reason: to have some fun while carrying out their mysterious plan. The scene then shifts as Giovanni gently uses healing mana on the food seller's forehead. Almost instantly, the seller feels a soothing warmth spreading through the small wound. Giovanni lets out a light chuckle and explains that the seller's scalp had only been slightly scratched. To prevent the wound from getting infected, he had simply used a small amount of purification magic. The unexpected display of holy magic leaves the food seller completely stunned. At the same time, Seongun is equally shocked. Until this moment, he had believed that Giovanni was actually Gio in disguise, but seeing him use holy magic completely shatters that assumption. Unable to make sense of what he has witnessed, Seongun wonders how Giovanni can even use holy magic. The mystery surrounding Gio's true identity only grows deeper, making him wonder when he will finally learn the truth. Meanwhile, the food seller excitedly realizes that Giovanni must be a devoted believer. The seller immediately understands that he had been mistaken from the very beginning. Since beast tamers usually do not worship any god, Giovanni's incredible strength had made him mistake him for a monster instead. As the seller thinks it through, he realizes he has never heard of a monster capable of using holy magic. Someone skilled enough to perform purification rituals alone must be an incredibly devoted believer. That realization leaves him wondering why such a person is not serving as a priest. Curious and filled with respect, the food seller then asks whether Giovanni and his companions will be attending the upcoming sun cult initiation. Hearing this, Seongun realizes what the seller is talking about and understands that it is already time for the Temple of the Sun's initiation ceremony. The food seller confirms that the initiation is always held in the middle of winter. He then happily shares that his youngest sibling recently awakened as a priest and will be participating in this very initiation. Thinking about his younger sibling fills the seller with joy. Meeting another devoted believer unexpectedly reminds him of that special moment, leaving him genuinely happy, even if only for a brief time. Seongun smiles and mentions that he has heard it becomes easier to receive God's gaze when a large number of people gather together. The food seller agrees and admits that he is slightly worried about how his youngest sibling will make a living if he is not chosen by a god during the initiation. Seongun reassures him that since his sibling awakened as a priest, his affinity for holy magic must be exceptional. With such talent, he should be able to secure a desk job at the temple. The food seller smiles while handing them their food and expresses his hope that everything will work out. He then mentions that the upcoming initiation is expected to be a huge event and encourages Seongun and the others to come and watch it. Seongun smiles and agrees to attend. Before leaving, he asks the food seller to visit the collector's building again. With their conversation over, Seongun and the others leave the area. As they walk away, Seongun turns to Gio and asks whether he is truly certain that nothing happened at dawn. Gio simply explains that Honey insists he is innocent. Seongun looks at Gio suspiciously. He wonders whether the concept of innocence spoken of by a being of origin is the same as a human's understanding of innocence. Even so, Seongun realizes that he has no choice but to believe Gio. He then asks Gio whether he plans to return to the portrait that day. Gio looks around at the crowded streets and admits that being outside is fun. There are so many people to see, along with countless things to experience. However, despite all the excitement, Gio feels that this world is not where he truly belongs. For a fragile and harmless portrait like him to survive, the outside world has simply become far too harsh. Deep down, Gio admits that he is actually scared. Seongun glances at him and understands the difficulty Gio must be facing. Gio is kind and highly sensitive to good and evil, yet he has to come outside while sacrificing his own essence just to do so. Even with those difficulties, Seongun is glad that Gio managed to have some fun outside. He then asks whether Gio plans to watch the upcoming initiation. Gio confirms that he does because he is curious about it. Seongun tells Gio that he will inform him when the initiation begins. Until then, he advises Gio to rest safely inside the portrait. After spending a short time sightseeing, Gio eventually returns to the portrait. Once back inside, he falls asleep and ends up sleeping for an entire day. Gio thinks to himself that the outside world is dangerous compared to the safety of the blanket. Suddenly, a system window appears and reports that his assimilation rate has reached 14.8%. Gio begins analyzing the situation and realizes that, as far as he knows, he should still be synchronizing with Jiovanni. However, the sensation of synchronization feels much weaker inside the portrait than it did when he was outside. He also notices that the synchronization process has slowed down compared to when he came into contact with water outside. A moment later, the system window updates again and shows that the assimilation rate has dropped to 12.8%. Gio then realizes that this must be one of the unique traits of the portrait world. He had never noticed this difference while staying inside the portrait. However, after experiencing the outside world, he can now clearly feel the contrast. Even though he is still synchronizing while inside the portrait, Gio begins to wonder whether the process is slower because he is treated as a painting rather than a human. After thinking about everything, Gio proudly concludes that he is truly amazing, exactly as he expected. At this point, it becomes clear that Gio is completely obsessed with himself. Gio decides that it is time to visit the old man. He suggests that they should pack plenty of sandwiches for the journey. At that moment, the system window displays Giovanni's active quests. One quest is to communicate with the sun god, while the other is to give the Little Mermaid an ending. Both quests are still incomplete. Honey also becomes excited at the idea of going on another adventure. Gio then prepares plenty of food for their journey. Once everything is ready, he transforms into Giovanni and enters the sea painting. After arriving inside, Giovanni speaks to someone and remarks that the priest has arrived very late. He asks them to understand that he had simply gone outside for a little while to see the world beyond the painting. As Giovanni moves through the underwater world, he notices something strange. Even though he is clearly underwater, he can still breathe normally. Giovanni wonders whether this is because he is already considered dead in this world, or because his essence still remains that of a portrait even after synchronizing. He begins to feel as though he is not bound by the rules of this world. This reminds him of the time he was inside the painted forest, where he also seemed to exist beyond the world's normal laws. As the scene continues, we learn that Giovanni is speaking with the spirits of his father. Giovanni reacts to what they tell him and considers it a shame. He even wonders whether it feels like he has lost his own hometown. Giovanni then uses the sun's miracle to create air bubbles around the food he has brought with him. He explains that the food must not get wet, as he wants to keep everything in perfect condition. After preparing the meal, Giovanni politely asks his father to enjoy the food. At that moment, the system window appears again and confirms that the quest to communicate with the sun god has been completed. The scene then shifts to the guild, where the guild master discusses Gio's strange behavior with Seongun. The guild master points out that Gio seems to have another personality hidden within him. Seongun reminds the guild master that he had already promised to organize a report and submit it soon. However, the guild master had insisted on calling him over personally. Seongun then explains that he is not responsible only for Gio's portrait. The sea has also been incredibly noisy lately, so he keeps getting called over to deal with the situation. Hearing this, the guild master becomes interested and focuses on Seongun's mention of the sea.